What's the Chinese response to the Biden administration's policy of alliance building? Developments like the AUKUS and strengthening of the security role of the Quad. Does all that contribute to the sense of insecurity that you were talking about? Do the Chinese perceive a new level of hostile alliance development in East Asia?
Yes, I think China is very concerned about U.S. effort to strengthen its security alliances in this region, because China has this inherent suspicion that any American-led security alliance in the Asia-Pacific will be anti-China in nature. So I think China is taking every effort to make it less, make the U.S. less able to achieve substantive cooperation in that regard. For example, regarding the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal, China is proposing at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that given the implications of this deal for international non-proliferation regime, the IAEA should have a new system that allows countries to voice their opinions on this, and before the international community can reach a consensus on this issue, the US, the UK, and Australia should not go ahead with implementing the deal. So China is using diplomatic tools, and among others, to slow down this process because it feels that this AUKUS deal and its broader implication for a stronger coalition against China could really present a challenge to China's security and China's regional influence. So similarly, China is also pushing back very heavily against the Quad and the Quad Plus initiatives, and any US efforts to strengthen bilateral alliance with Japan or with South Korea in this region. So those will become, I think, will continue to be flashpoints in regional security.
Tong, we're nearly at the end of the hour here. So it's better just pose a sort of a final question here, which really has to do with, what kind of a vision does China have of East Asia, and what sort of agreed order would it find acceptable? Is there any inclination in China to begin thinking about some Northeast Asian regional security architecture of the sort that exists already in ASEAN? And what do you see as the immediate priorities, sort of lower tensions and reduced powers, dangers of great power rivalry?
From my standpoint, I haven't seen much detailed discussion that elaborates on the type of regional vision you just mentioned. I think China in recent couple of years, at least, is mostly in crisis response mode. There is so much going on, so much pressure from the US and its allies, and so much internal challenges, including from the pandemic and the subsequent economic slowdown. I think Chinese experts have not been very proactive in laying out their future-oriented vision for a regional order. But we have seen China taking specific measures in practical issue areas. China proposes to join CPTPP as an effort to strengthen its economic integration with regional players. China really values the importance of ASEAN as a regional organization to counterbalance against American efforts at building new security coalitions. China sees ASEAN as a more neutral player, and ASEAN has a common interest with China in preserving the importance of ASEAN's influence in regional affairs. And China is also working bilaterally in a more tailored way to address the perceived threat regarding South Korea. For example, China sees that as a weakest link in American regional alliance network. So China is redoubling its effort to build a more positive relationship with South Korea, both in the economic arena and also regarding security and diplomatic issues. Regarding Japan, China is taking a different approach, more, I think, more assertive approach regarding Japan. So it's hard to say that China has a well thought out and coherent, comprehensive vision for regional order. But maybe over time, we'll see more clearer discussion from Chinese experts.
Could I just follow up with one last question about how decision-making works in the Chinese system? You've described the growing sense of regime insecurity in recent years. And Mr. Xi's policy has brought about significant shifts from those of his predecessors, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin. At times, different factions within the Communist Party favor different approaches to policy. So I wanted to ask, is there space in the Chinese system for alternative points of view? Are there different schools of thought within the Chinese Communist Party that create any possibility for China to develop a different foreign policy approach?
Well, firstly, I think it's clear by now that the recent China's foreign policy approach is very much influenced by the personal preference of paramount leader in a top-down process, right? We have seen President Xi really promoting this idea of China should adopt the fighting spirit against external aggression. China should stand up to protect and defend its legitimate interests. And it's that type of directive that motivated the Chinese diplomats from the foreign minister all the way down to operational level diplomats to start, adopt this approach of strong rhetoric, so-called wolf warrior diplomacy. So that reflects the influence of this top leadership in a system when the power is increasingly concentrated under himself. Whether I'm sure there are different thoughts within the system, but the thing is, given that no one dares to share their alternative views, even with close colleagues under the domestic environment, it's really hard to know how popular and how widespread those alternative views really are, and what's their real influence within the system. And given that the paramount leader has been more and more successful in implementing the power concentration process, recently by the successful conclusion of the 6th plenum of the Party Congress, the achievement of the historical resolution that really further strengthened his status in the system. So China is continuing down the path of power concentration and making the paramount leaders' influence even more absolute in the system. So it's hard for me to imagine any near-term chance for major readjustment of China's foreign policy. Doesn't mean that there is not internal debates going on. I'm sure there must be some discussion, but it's hard to know the extent of those discussions. It's hard to imagine that any fundamentally different idea will be able to influence China's foreign policy. Kevin, if I may, I'll just make one final clarification. All my comments are not aiming at making any judgment about Chinese government policy, about Chinese thinking. My entire intention is simply to explain to our audience about the mainstream thinking within China, including within the policy community.
Well, thank you very much, Tong. You've given us a very frank and insightful view of the kind of internal domestic dynamics fueling China's foreign policy. I think you've mapped out very clearly for us that China's position is defensive in motivation, even if it may result in some perception from the outside of being offensive in consequence. And I think that you've also kind of given us a good sense of the way in which a centralized foreign policy can itself, in a strange sort of way, generate its own kind of pathology when it's not able to be contested, both internally and publicly. So you've given us much to think on and much to reflect on as we move into, I think, a kind of a very turbulent 21st century. So I fervently hope that the containment of China will cease, that we may be able to develop some regional and global security architecture that China will be able to share its own threat perceptions in. And I hope very much that the West and the US and the Quad and others can begin thinking of much more creative ways of responding to China's current ascendancy. So thank you very much for all of your insightful, frank, and sometimes worrying contributions to this conversation.